right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. I hope you enjoyed lunch. I know that I did. We actually have Sarah's name up on this slide as well, but I'm standing on the stage solo. Her name is just on there because I thought that she added a bit of class to my presentation. Anyway, we did originally create these slides together back in 2017, actually. I'm like, I can hear everything you're saying. So how do you put together a good self-assessment team? And that's like a step that you can take well beyond when you're ready to begin preparing an application. You can start putting together a self-assessment team now if you want to, and not be ready to prepare or submit an application for another 5 years. But you can still be doing some of this work. So this is just kind of the who, what, why, when, how of the self-assessment process. Questions that you kind of want to ask yourself. Who should be involved in the process and the team? Who's going to champion this work? Who can do the work and collect the information? And make sure you're also considering personal identity factors as well. I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. You want to look at what experience the team has. So you want people that have different work experiences with being a caregiver. Say they're taking care of elderly parents, or maybe they are a parent themselves. You need to assess what self-assessment has already been carried out. So a lot of times there's a good amount of work has been done, but not everybody on campus is aware of it. Inventory what consultation has already happened, inventory what you've done that has already seen some success. And then importantly, like why? So why are you doing the self-assessment in the first place? Why is it important to be doing this? Why are you seeing potential leaks in the academic pathway at the point that you're doing the assessment? So if you're losing a lot of people from a particular department, then you need to ask yourself why might that be happening? And if you see any gaps between any race, ethnic, or gender groups, or any intersection of those, even looking at just the institutional composition of students across different departments, then you need to also ask yourself why. And you may not be able to get to the answer, but you would be able to put together an action that would help you get to the answer eventually. Need to think about the process kind of ahead of time. Like I was saying before, a lot of times people will open the guidelines or the handbook on August 2nd of the year that they plan on applying. And it's a little bit more work than that. So you need to think about when you're going to start the self-assessment process, when are you going to carry out the various stages of implementation of self-assessment and action planning? When do you think you might be able to apply? It's perfectly fine, even if you put in a letter of intent to apply 6 months from when you put in the letter. If you're like, no, I want to defer for 2 years, also okay. So we're not judging you in any way, shape, or form, and this work takes time. Also decide when the team will meet, how often the team will meet, where they'll meet, make sure that that's all equitable. And then how are you going to communicate this work? So ideally you would let the rest of your campus know that you're doing this work. Some places feel emboldened and happy and empowered enough to say, by the way, hey, the rest of the world, we're doing this. And I think it's good to be transparent about that. Also consider how the action plan is going to be implemented, and then importantly, resourced, right? So you can come up with a set of great actions that might end up making a huge impact, but if you don't have the funding or the person power or a plan in place to do it, it's not going to get you anywhere. Sarah will talk to you a lot more about how to measure progress and impact and how to set yourself up for success in that way. And then we'll talk a bit about redundancy and future-proofing the work. So nobody likes when they have a great dean who's really interested in equity, and then that dean leaves the school, and then whatever the initiative was is their pet project, and then everyone else who was working on it is like, hey, new dean, let's do this too. And the new dean's like, my priorities are elsewhere. So how do you make sure that all of the work that you're doing is in fact institutionalized and building capacity and being nurtured to a point that it will continue on no matter who's working on it? Okay, so who do you put on your self-assessment team? These are some suggestions that, that we give within the handbook and within the criteria and guidelines. But these questions are also what the peer reviewers are looking at when they're assessing that section of your application. When you're talking about your self-assessment process and you're talking about who's on your team, you need to be clear about how the team was formed and why members were chosen. So like what is their expertise? Why did you include them in this? You need to be careful about appropriately reflecting a broad diversity of personal identities, roles. So if you don't want all administrators, you don't want all faculty. You may want to consider including a graduate student and or an undergraduate student for their perspective. Think about positional seniority. So you want some people that are as close to the top as you can get. That'll be really critical for making sure that the work is resourced well. But also, obviously, you're including the folks who are working at a lower level. Career stage, it's important to have the perspective from as wide a range as you could possibly get. So newly hired faculty all the way to somebody who's about to retire, for say. But then also importantly, we ask the peer reviewers to assess, did your team include legal counsel? So did you involve your general counsel in these discussions from the very beginning? There are other roles that we also recommend in the guidelines that you should consider including. And these aren't the updated slides, so that's not going to be useful for our next talk that I'm giving. Oh, well, anyway, I'll tell you one of the, no, it wasn't. I remember what it is. Don't worry. I'm just concerned about our next set of slides. Somebody from institutional research, if you've got an institutional research office, is critical because they oftentimes know where some of the information is located that other people don't know. A representative from HR, because they're gonna have a good perspective on hiring policies, what you can and can't do, what are the state and the federal restrictions on hiring, how do you make sure that you're equal opportunity. Having a social scientist, critical, because oftentimes you're looking at, say, climate assessments, and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. Or you're trying to convey policy and how you're gonna assess change in policy and how that's impacting the rest of your campus. You need to have a social scientist on board who can tell you the most effective ways to do that. And then what is not updated in this slide, but what Jess recommended to me during lunch that I think is good, is having a representative from, if you have a faculty union or a faculty senate. Having a representative from them is critical. I hadn't thought about that, but when I think about it, I'm like, of course, I'm like, oh, you want faculty on board. That's probably the best way to get faculty on board if you do have a system like that. So what are we asking the self-assessment team to do? The peer reviewers are going to be looking at the breakdown of the involvement, contribution, and person hours worked for each member of the self-assessment team. Just out of just the corners of your mind, why do you think that we ask that? They look at that. Why would we be concerned about person hours, contribution, involvement? I heard somebody. Say it. Equity, yes. So how do we make sure that this was equitable? Why are we asking this question? Because research has shown, and we all know, that a lot of this work falls to women and or people of color, and frequently women who are people of color. And they often don't get recognized for that work. So what we're trying to do is encourage the self-assessment team to be thoughtful about this as they're going about the work of examining equity on campus. Also, it's important to consider the future role of self-assessment. So you do the self-assessment, that's great, but what is the role of the self-assessment team going forward? Are you gonna have some turnover? Are you gonna rotate people? If so, are they gonna be representing the same kind of perspectives? And And then importantly, is the team appropriately authorized and resourced? So you can have this great action plan, you can have somebody who's generally governing and managing the whole action plan as each one of the individual actions is performed. But if you don't have that authority and you don't have the resources to do it, you're not going to be able to make the progress that you want to make. So you'll have this great action plan, and then you'll send it to somebody's office, and they'll be like, thanks. This isn't really my thing. I don't understand why we're doing it. So you want to just try to avoid that from the get-go. And then very, very importantly, we are concerned about how the institution is rewarding the people that are doing this work, right? So oftentimes, think about the emotional burden that is on some of the people that are doing maybe more advising than they had originally intended to do. Maybe somebody gets assigned to an advisor or a mentor who's not a particularly nurturing or kind advisor or mentor. They're gonna seek out another member of the faculty to get what they need there. And that's frequently not rewarded within an institution. So we're trying to make sure that this work on self-assessment and application preparation and even action planning implementation, how are you getting rewarded for that? So are they buying some of your time? So they're expecting you to do less teaching, less research? Are they lessening your workload? And or are they giving you a bit of increase in salary for that year and some public recognition for the work that you've done? And then again, is there special attention to the extra burdens on people of color and women when they participate? So you obviously want to have everyone's perspective there and represented in the room, but you don't want to overburden people that are already doing too much. And again, this is a slide that I had before, but if you have any questions about this, I think that I talked very quickly, which is a first. And so any questions that you have about this, suggestions, Sarah, if I said something wrong, you can, no, I said everything right, so that's excellent. And she obviously has much more experience guiding people in forming self-assessment teams than I do. Questions? Yeah, can you come to the mic? Yeah.
It's just a very quick question.
That's okay. It's just hard to hear unless it's mic'd. Thank you.
Hi, Sarah Higdon. I was just wondering if you had a feel for how many hours it does take to generate a report if people are committing to it.
So generating the actual report takes, I think somebody reported like,
I mean, from start to finish, the whole
oh,
process,
like
right?
for
How
the
many
whole
people
process.
hours?
Oh, it's going to take over a year, and it would take. Do you have any idea how many people hours?
Not people hours, but it normally takes 18 months to put together
Yeah.
a successful
Yeah, successful application, 18 months is usually and then the amount of time within that. I know that a lot of self-assessment teams meet monthly just to check in. When it comes to actually like writing the application, I think that that's pretty intensive, especially because you want to have an equal voice throughout. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of, there was one application we had where I think it said like 60 hours or something of like writing.
So we quite often find that the chair of the self-assessment team in the UK will get either a 0.1 or a 0.2 FTE buyout. So yeah, 20 to 40%. I think.
Thank you.